Good evening and welcome everyone to Unruly Therapeutic, Black feminist space making and living the change we want to be. I'm Zenobia Morrill, a senior research associate of the Psychological Humanities and Ethics Center at Boston College, and I have the pleasure of introducing tonight our esteemed speakers, Feluke Taylor and Gail Lewis. I think you all will experience this lecture to be refreshing and an enriching addition to our series hosted by the Lynch School of Education and Human Development. Tonight, we explore Black feminisms and a Black feminist ethic in connection not only to therapeutic practice, but in relation to the deeper and more textured aspects of human subjectivity, from which we may have been severed, disavowed, alienated, and toward engaging with what has been rendered other as inroads into other ways of being human. Feluke Taylor highlights an ethic of making space for what is unsettled and for the experience of not knowing. Allow me now to introduce her as our main speaker this evening. Feluke Taylor is a therapist and writer who works with Black feminist modes that create and hold open spaces for the emergence of the yet to be and for the therapeutics that call this into being. She is the author of How the Hiding Seek, what she refers to as an experiment in creative writing as intermediary for what might be conceived as separate, human and nature, us and them, mind and body, now and then, fiction and nonfiction. She spent several years growing up in the Gambia before returning to live in the city of London, where she was born. Dr. Taylor's brand new book, out this month, February 2023, in the US, titled Unruly Therapeutic, Black Feminist Writings and Practices in Living Room, was inspiration for tonight's event. Following Feluke Taylor, we will hear responses from author, academic, and psychoanalytic psychotherapist Gail Lewis. Lewis's political subjectivity was formed in the intensities of Black feminist and anti-racist struggle and through a socialist, anti-imperialist lens. She was a member of the Brixton Black Women's Group and one of the founder members of the Organization of Women of African and Asian Descent, Britain's first national organization for Black and other women of color. She organizes her thinking around the category experience, which she conceives as a vector of both the felt senses in conjunction with social, structural, and cultural processes, and an analytic in the production of meaning and knowing otherwise. She is currently writing a book on Black feminism in Britain and has written on feminism, intersectionality, the welfare state and citizenship, psychoanalysis and Black feminism, and the psychosocial dynamics of racialized gendered experience. We are very grateful to have both of you here tonight. And without any further delay, Feluke Taylor.
Thank you, Zenobia. Thank you for agreeing to moderate this conversation, experience that I'm sharing with Gail, my comrade, friend, colleague, sister from another mother. I see you there in your living room, and I'm also in a room that gets a lot of living. Just to help me feel at home, I need to tell you that this body is not 100%. I've got a cough and a cold. I'm drinking ginger and lemon. If I start coughing, please, give me grace. But I want to say thank you also to Hayley and Darby, who are in the background, managing all the tech and have been looking after us, making sure that we feel as comfortable as we can here. And thank you also to all the people that made this happen, many of whom I don't know, but some of them I do. David Goodman, and I think Lynn Layton and Sue Brand and Lara Shia have been working to make this happen. So thank you for those efforts, that magic. So I'm going to read excerpts from Unruly, which in some ways feels like it was written a long time ago. It's being published next week, but it feels like it was written a long time ago. But I've recently had it refreshed in my mind because I've recorded an audiobook version of it just a couple of weeks ago, which meant I went into an actual studio. I had a producer and a director. I felt cute. And then I got to the studio and realized I didn't know what a producer or a director actually did. But it turns out that the first direction that I took was about where to start reading. And the director said, well, I think you should start with the dedication to the grandmothers, because I liked it a lot, maybe because I am a grandmother. And I was surprised, and apparently whatever I thought a director or producer was, it wasn't a grandmother, which is strange and kind of rude, but also a reminder, an ongoing direction, if you like, that came through the director, who was also a grandmother, about where to start. So I'm going to start with the dedication and then read from the introduction a little. Dedicated to the unknown grandmothers, the deep time aquifers who carry me through, who are always there when the waters break. But before I read from the book, actually, it feels important to tell you that I never met any of my grandmothers or grandfathers or fathers, for that matter. And my first memory of meeting my mother was when I was 27 years old, by which time I was a mother myself. The dedication to the grandmothers evokes right from the start themes of absence and presence, themes that right from the start of my life have been central, along with the question of what to do about those absences, how to live them. I could use the word loss here, but I choose absence because I want us to consider a specific kind of loss, the loss of something that, as far as one can know, one has never known, the loss of something that was somehow supposed to be there but was not. As I experienced it, what this loss felt like was not anything as tangible as losing something, but rather being at a loss, or as I lived it, the sense of being lost. The story that this book tells starts here with being lost. And I wonder, Darby, if you could put up the first slide, which is the quote. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to leave it there, and hopefully it will become clear why that is there as I read from the introductory chapter, which is called Starting with Play because Thicker is Better and Being Lost has its moments. The starting point of my argument is that if the aim of an introduction is orientation, the practice of naming a destination and informing the reader of proposed routes, then I'm about to fail. I'm not breaking it down like this. I'm starting instead with another kind of breakdown. The train breakdown is due to a signal failure on the London Underground. The breakdown is why you find yourself stuck below ground for an uncomfortable length of time, and then deposited not at Victoria, the central London interchange that was your intended destination, but at Pimlico. Pimlico is the stop before Victoria, not an interchange and not particularly busy. The platform, unlike most other stations on the line, is never heaving with people. All of you descending now is likely the most action it has seen in a while. Pimlico is a place you pass through, under, most days, but never see. Very few people disembark the train at this stop until now. Now, you are one in a crowd of people blinking at the sudden brightness of day and unfamiliar landscape. You, like everyone else, hold your phone in the air trying to catch a signal. Your phone, like everyone else's, has an app that will tell you where you are and how to proceed. For some reason, maybe the networks are down, maybe there are too many of you trying to log on in this precise moment. The app refuses to load. Your usual habits, go-to aids, and ways of knowing are disrupted. You are disoriented. The loss and lostness make you feel anxious. The anxiety is energy in your body seeking to discharge itself into action. It wants you to do something. Disorientation becomes gateway to something else. Or, to put it another way, now that the existing familiar app has failed to load, you will have to find other ways to orient yourself. This could mean asking somebody for directions, or following the traffic, the sun, or the smell of the river. It could mean inviting the body you are traveling in, the vehicle that has relied on GPS for so long, it has forgotten that it might have any other navigational systems, inviting it to re-engage instinct and find its way. The starting point of my argument is that this book is reaching towards spaces most easily found by letting go of the idea that we already know, or should already know, where we are going. Scholarship by Black feminists on. Scholarship by Black feminists has helped me to theorize an instinctual wayfinding that I find I have relied on in my development as a therapist. Thank you, Darby. Did you take the slide off? Yeah, thank you. It has been liberating to have instinct theorized as more than a product of the innate biology or behavior of individual beings. Black feminisms have provided a foundation from which it has become more possible to speak and write of interconnection, of a spirited life, soul, a natural mystic blowing through the air, and of the engagement with all of this in therapeutic practice. We may not always want to name this or its source as divine, as Jackie Alexander observes, but at the very least, if we recognize that interconnectedness, that sense in which we meet at a certain place, and that meeting place is crucial for who we are, how we think, what we do, there is a lot at stake in that meeting. I want to think more about that meeting and document some of the meeting places, the interactions with Black feminists and their scholarship that have shaped who I am, how I think, and what I actually do as a therapist. This shaping necessarily disrupts some of the neoliberal framing of therapeutic practice, where competition is maybe the defining characteristic of human relation. It raises questions about the focus on efficiency that can leave therapists with less room to think, work, and play with the possibilities that our interconnectedness affords. With therapeutic interventions increasingly designed to move people as directly as possible between 2 points, representing problem and solution, space for wandering and wondering is squeezed. As a consequence, there is less legitimate room in our consulting rooms for other ways of knowing and moving. This squeeze should not surprise us when the Western philosophical perspectives that underpin psychotherapy have so thoroughly valorized rationality. We may even have become relatively comfortable operating in this restricted space, may describe it as being boundaried, or refer to it as the therapeutic frame. However, as this squeeze reproduces the philosophical and material squeeze on and squeezing out of Black life, there are crucial questions to be asked in relation to how it gives rise to therapeutic interventions that do not account for or incorporate the evidence and knowing of Black livingness. Among the many undertakings of Black feminist scholarship is an ethical questioning of these tighter, straighter, apparently efficient paths. We are interested in the insufficiency that these pathways mask, and in their insufficient capacity to reckon with or respond, because of their exclusion of Black life, to the problems in which we all find ourselves. To draw on the language of narrative therapy, we find ourselves in a position where the stories we have come to rely on as we develop models of therapeutic practice are a little thin, or more than a little, which is to say that models and apps may be useful, but are not the full story. As modes of orientation, the models we have been taught to rely on have been coded to view certain spaces, experiences, and ways of being/knowing as superfluous, as footnotes, as unnecessary diversions. They are models that, with their roots, ROOTS, and roots ROUTES, coded accordingly, miss what else is there to be seen and made sense of. When you are that certain space, experience, knowing and being, when you are the what else, you may find that the unnecessary diversion begins to take shape as the ground of the therapeutic you need. This book makes a claim for Black feminisms and their thickening potential, for thicker stories and modes of storytelling, for diversionary ground as a foundation for therapeutic practice. As and enable documentation and theorization of the situated specificity of Black feminism. Faced with the task of surviving hostile environments where it is always viewed as out of place, Black being creates space and place. This out of placeness and the living that emerges from it transforms the word home, because it requires us to make room for other imaginings of what home means. When Black subjectivity is rejected, ignored, and gaslit, the insights of these transformational space and placemaking processes are missed. As the transformations persist, so does the missing. The ongoing burn of an infinite library becomes the acts of destruction that underpin and compound a devastating incompleteness of address in therapeutic training and practice. Creating space here to document and theorize the situated specificity of Black feminism is about making space/place with and for the out of place, is about resisting the pull to turn or move away, is about staying with out of placeness, and all your irritations and good intentions for it, long enough to hear what it knows and to recognize homes made in an absence of home. As political praxis, artistic creation, academic inquiry, and pedagogy. This introduction, like the rest of the book, is structured around a Black feminist quote. This quote, from psychoanalytic psychotherapist Gail Lewis, is from a paper in which she thinks about Black feminism as an object available for play. Lewis acknowledges play as, quote, simultaneously creative with a potential to bring subjects into personhood, and dangerously precarious with a potential to collapse into the terrain of monsters, end quote. In the process of writing this book, making distinctions between the enjoyment of personhood and the terror of monsters has often been challenging. Bringing my personhood to the page has involved an ongoing navigation of risk. There is a risk that this public presentation of my interior life will have a bearing on my practice as a therapist, or more specifically, on my capacity to be an unknown entity and therefore a space for projection and fantasy in therapeutic relationships. I have asked myself what the people with whom I work or may work with in the future might make of these revelations. I do not yet have an answer, but choose to welcome the finding out. It is welcome in the room, along with everything else that the Unruly offers here for our attention. It feels important to acknowledge that much of my own living and learning has been facilitated by people who have dared to speak of their troubles, struggles, desires, and dreams, who dared to reveal themselves. It feels right to continue this tradition, to include practices of revelation, and to draw from Jennifer Nash, embrace vulnerability and risk as a Black feminist ethic. Also, when Lewis describes play as, quote, always both thought and action, as bringing together pre-existing elements in new ways, inner and outer, end quote, I get excited. Political praxis, artistic creation, academic inquiry, and pedagogy, an irresistible playground, the space in which I have given myself permission to play. And just one last paragraph. In dominant discourse, scholarship, and practice. In dominant discourse, scholarship, and practice, we find that expectations form. We expect things to be presented in particular ways. You may find some of those ways here, but you're also invited to let your expectations thicken a little. Thinking thick here with Tressie McMillan Cottom, fuller body, fuller life, the lie of ever being too much. Thickening as articulation of the desire and need to more fully embody our being in a world that is constantly advising, demanding that we slim down, streamline, and straighten up. Expect more. Expect life story, thoughts arranged waywardly, circular arrangements, crossroads, and intermittent horizons, tracks, sidetracks rather than being sidetracked, resonances and frictions, to write on a page, in the air, in your mind, in conversation, to rest and repeat, to not always know where a sentence is going. Expect to not always believe the arrival is possible. Expect to arrive anyway. Expect to pause and breathe and play. Expect disorientation. Anti-invisibility modes. Expect existing apps to constantly reload. Expect glitches and loopholes and glitches. Expect Black feminism. Expect to get thick. And the quote was from, oh, thank you, Gail. I can see Gail on the screen. I don't know if anybody knows I can see Gail keeping me company. But when Gail writes of refusing the normative terms in that quote by which Black women are usually rendered visible, I hear her address of the ways in which we are made absent. And in the next chapter, I quote from a book on race, psychoanalysis, and feminism, published more than 25 years ago, which proposed that, quote, psychoanalytic theory should make way for competing discourses of spirituality and diasporic consciousness. Yes, it should. But what are we doing while it doesn't? And what will we do when it does not make way? While it insists on the normative terms that include our absence. I think of therapeutic practice in the way that Gail writes of Black feminist scholarship as acts of curation, bringing about artifacts, which are then available for scrutiny. And later in the book, I write with a quote from artist Languid Hands, Imani Mason-John, and Rabs Lansiko, in which they speak specifically to the root of the word curation, which is care. What kind of curators are we as therapists and social workers? What kind of care might we offer to the lost? And I'm not only speaking of those who we might call clients or patients here, though they may well feel lost or at a loss, but also to the care we practitioners give to the lost and at a loss in ourselves. Black Feminisms was an inviting space for me because it highlighted care and refused to let it go. I was able to think more widely, more spaciously, we might say, about the absences that I and the people I was in relation with lived and brought into the consulting room. So not think only about a missing mother or father and the psychological weight of those particular absences, but about the absences we live and make life with in what Christina Sharp describes as the wake, Saidiya Hartman's unfolding afterlives of slavery, about the domination of ideas about the figure of the human, white man as a universal referent, with which, as Zakiya Iman Jackson observes, quote, many scholars have essentially ignored alternative conceptions of being and the non-human that have been produced by blackened people. In this bigger space, we can also be informed by the work of Hortense Spillers, for example, on the loss/absence of gender, and by the poetics of Norbese Philip, inviting us to address and feel the loss/absence of mother tongue in her discourse on the logic of language. While psychoanalytic theory insists on its white subject and a focus predominantly or solely on the consequences of parenting performed by individuals on that individual subject's psyche, it misses, or we could say actively absents, how the wake is our collective parent, how we are born into these losses and absences, how at a lostness is incorporated into our livingness. So Unruly stands here for that which does not and cannot wait for the institutions to make way. It makes its own pathways and invites us along to be with lostness otherwise, not seeking to fix according to any normative terms, but knowing the value of staying with the trouble and riding unsettledness, proposing that it is from here that we can usher in the what else and the what is not yet but must be. We might think of this along the lines of Tina Camp's tenets of Black feminist futurity. And we might think of it as a space of play, to follow Gail's lead here, and a space, to quote Dion Brown, who I listened to recently on Between the Covers, fabulous episode, you should listen to that, who says, where the Black artist plays in the world that we should be living in. And I want to say a little more about artists and play, but first I need to reclaim a word from what Natalie Diaz might call the colonial lexicon. And that word is random. Now, random, according to the dictionary, made, done, or happening without method or conscious decision. And a more vernacular definition, the one I hear most frequently, suggests something that's a little weird or out of place, something that can't be understood. So that's a bit random in response to a comment that seems to come out of the blue or doesn't follow the flow of conversation. Or, as I overheard recently, did you see that woman with the random hat, where the hat is somehow seen to be out of place? Now, the root of the word random is from the French word random, meaning to gallop at great speed, and it's sometimes linked with the idea of being rash or impulsive. So we could think that the woman was not methodical in her selection of a hat. She didn't consciously think through her wardrobe selection, and that may or may not be the case. But however random its arrival, the hat is now here, bending the light around itself and reflecting in the eyes of those of us now looking at it, moving along neural pathways as we visualize it, embedding itself in our brain cortices, here making waves in the air around me and between us as we sound its name, hat, random hat. The coloniality of the lexicon is revealed in the idea that random is happening without method or conscious decision. Who says random is not method? If we stay with the brain for a moment, we could say that the amygdala is random, since it is the part that detects threats on an unconscious level and makes action happen, literally makes movements in our bodies without conscious decision. But we don't call it random, maybe because amygdala sounds scientific, even though the meaning of amygdala is simply almond, named after the shape that a particular human saw when he looked at that region of the brain, which seems a bit random to me and also not, which is the unsettled, paradoxical space that I want to reclaim for the word random, to what can gallop in, appearing rash and odd, while also rooted in and living with, I would say, the unknown grandmothers in the aquifers of deep time. So for me, Unruly is a mode of living with the trouble that includes the absences in psychological theory created because we, Black women, are not the subject that they address or the humans they're interested in, and the trouble created by the conflation of method and conscious decision that leaves little to no room for valuing and therefore engaging the knowing that is random. And I do engage with random as knowing, even when it is knowledge that mocks my attempts to define it. So my current working definition might be something like a knowing that moves at great speed and unfathomable slowness, while experiencing no border between psyche soma, mind-body, human nature, intangible material, past, present, future, self-other, me, we, or us. But don't write it down because tomorrow it will be something else. Anyway, what I want you to know is that together with an ethic of care, random knowing provides a steer for the unruly therapeutic. And for this unruly therapist who has had to learn to work with it because it has insisted on working me. To declare that random is without method simply on the basis that we are not always aware of and cannot fathom its method is what the grandmothers might call unforgivable arrogance, as if we believe that whatever we are not aware of cannot itself be aware. But I have had to forgive myself because in the early days of practicing therapy, when I was very aware that the world I was practicing in was hostile to my being and scornful of my knowledge, I was both shy about and protective of these unruly methods. I kept them on the down low, discussed them only on a need-to-know basis with those who I felt would understand, mainly other Black women. And these women would have described themselves in different ways, maybe therapists, healers, artists, grandmothers. And Black feminisms have important things to say about the trouble of trying to live, work, and study within disciplinary borders that don't actually believe in you. But to speak as I do of therapy as an artistic practice can be controversial because in a world that has created a category called science and elevated it above others, therapists often do feel the need to defend the scientific nature of their practices and thus to remain within the borders of science, where respectability, status, and importantly, funding lie. None of which is to say I don't believe in science, only that I don't have faith in borders. Only that, thinking with Catherine McKittrick, I question the singularity of the story of science that tells itself as if it were a universal story. It is a single, thin story that encourages a single, thin imaginary. My partner, who's a teacher, will tell you that when Science Day comes around at school and staff and students are invited to dress as scientists, there will be a lot of white coats in the room and test tubes, and if resources allow, a microscope. because the single/thin story scientist does work in a laboratory and wear a white coat and is, even in the minds of the children who are majority Black, a white man. And a significant proportion of the children I'm referring to here have Caribbean heritage and may well have heard speak of using science outside of school. So if someone tells you Miss So-and-so is using science, then yes, Miss So-and-so is likely drawing on biology, chemistry, and physics, but expanding the space to include what they really cannot be separated from: our interconnectedness, spirited life, a natural mystic blowing through the air, science as art, art as science. And I'm just going to read a very short part from towards the end of the book. And Darby, if you could put up the second quote for me, please. That's Jackie Alexander. And endless possibility, also known as the space between theory and practice, also known as the distance between the therapeutics we are taught in school and the ones we develop for ourselves in response to and as practices of surviving racial capitalism, also known as the difference between work described for the purposes of award and accreditation and work happening in the room. My intention has not been to describe the in-between space in specific detail, remember opacity, but rather to signal toward the existence of this space and to the therapeutic itch in its unruly generativity. This book is not a how-to. It is offered in the spirit of how do we, how might we? And endless possibility is also psychotherapist in Sisterhood D agreeing to let me include here some of the long conversation we had about training and practice. I ask her what she imagines the training institution from which she graduated might not know about her practice. That every time I go to work as a psychotherapist, my ancestors are with me, she says. That I work intuitively, that I sometimes feel a gentle hand on my shoulder, that I can't work relationally if I'm not prepared to have a relationship. And of the theoretical curriculum, she says, when I think about some of the theory and the white Western models that we are taught, it pushes against everything that I am. She describes the physical, how she moves between sitting and standing, how she sometimes sits in different chairs or on the floor, and sometimes opposite the amethyst, she turns to show me the crystal behind her. After moving to work online, Dee has maintained a practice of physically opening the front door to each client. At the end of the session, she returns to the door to let them out again. I burn Palo Santo between clients, she says. I smile, me too. And music is, for both of us, all kinds of possibility for therapeutic convergence. She shares that this morning the mood was Afrobeats. I dance, I dance, I dance, I dance, I dance, she says. I move, I move, I move. And then I just stop and feel my heart, her hands on her heart now. And it reminds me that the drum beating in my chest is ancestral. And then, she says, we can get on with the work that needs to be done. And endless possibility is getting on with the work that needs to be done. What happens in the room that institutions might not know? Or put another way, how spacious do you feel in your practices of the therapeutic? Is there room for your dancing? If so, what are its forms? What space is there to attend to the random? And where there is none, how can it be made? How are we supporting ourselves and each other to ride with unsettledness? To keep moving in a world that, if it sees you at all, seeks to categorize, discipline, capture, and enclose you, and supplies you with models of therapy that can only aim to fix you and have you fix others in shapes according to the colonial logics from which they are formed. And no, I'm not suggesting you abandon your models, only inviting you to reflect for a moment on how the models may have abandoned you. May, implicitly or explicitly, have communicated that certain parts, heritage, geography, knowledges, even physicality, you have the wrong hair, a random hat, communicated that there are parts of you that cannot cross the border called psychoanalysis or psychotherapy and must be left outside and or pushed underground. So I end, as I began, underground with the aquifers, which Andrea Ballestero, author of A Future History of Water, reminds us are not the underground reservoirs or tanks that we commonly imagine. Not tanks, she says, more like kitchen sponges. They absorb and release, bend and flow, are always in connection and relation. They are not static and frustrate those who would attempt to tag them with exact coordinates. Try to map the boundaries of an aquifer today, and tomorrow they're already elsewhere and otherwise. Like the unknown grandmothers, aquifers remind me that the aim, my aim, the aim of an unruly therapeutic is not to cross borders, but to make room so that we can better feel, reckon with, and resist where the borders cross us, and to refuse to be severed, and gather ourselves individually and collectively, and make space, living room, for the elsewhere, for the otherwise. Thank you.
Gosh.
Oh, thanks, Gail.
It's gosh. I just need to breathe.
Me too.
I just need to breathe a moment. I want to say hello to everybody. I want to say thank you for inviting me to be here. I want to say what an extraordinary honor this is, and what an extraordinary challenge too, because I think you will have all experienced something now that has left you full of thought, of feeling, of tears, of warmth, of potential, of love, of loss, of connection, of brokenness, of an I don't quite yet know-ness, how to respond. I'm assuming that's how everybody in this room with us is feeling, something along that. And certainly, I already knew that to be asked to respond to something of this magnificence, this is a magnificent piece of work. You've just heard it delivered by the author, but an author who walks with and plays due regard to and lives among all those and those yet to come, who she's engaged in conversation, in thought, in life with. And it leaves me unable to respond. Feluke, how do I do that? How do I respond to the breadth and depth of your thought, your power, your wordsmithery? And especially when it evokes so much, speaks to so much your life, but our life as Black women, of what it means to be Black womanhood. And it is the absences, it is the silences, it is the categorical captures and erasures. But what you show us is what the life it is too, how in the interstices, we follow a North Star, we go to Moortown with Nanny, we find our maroon ways of living anyway. And I'm just full of it. Full, full, full. So excuse me, people, for my hesitancy in some senses in coming forward, in getting started. But in a way, this is where I wanted to start, because I wanted to say, I wanted to point to the gift that is the book, and the ways in which any gift is such a contradictory, complex offering that carries with it reciprocity and obligation, as well as gifting, as well as giving you something. You receive to be brought into a relational field that will require obligation and reciprocity. And my sense is that in this context in this we, I want to call up a we here, but it's the differentiated, hierarchically organized we of a community of practice called psychotherapists of one kind or another, that are themselves hierarchically organized, but always constituted in the image of and in the bowing down to whiteness and the subjects of whiteness at its heart. And Feluke comes in and says, no bother with that. Because to do that means you not only rob yourself of the capacity to actually do the kind of work that you are driven to do. We become therapists because in some senses it's maktub, it's written, we have to do it. But we can't do it in the image of whiteness. Feluke has shown us. Otherwise, we come up at Pimlico and we rely on a scientific instrument that cannot show us the way through. We're lost. And she shows us that there are all these resources around, all these resources written by Black feminists, are taken into Black feminism, if not written by Black feminists, if not made by Black feminists, but who are incorporated into a Black feminist ethic of care and finding ways to move and live anyway. And this is a real challenge for us in our community of practice called therapists, because we are trapped if we just stay there. We may even want to suggest that we're trapped if we keep as a secret the things we do in our consulting rooms that are outside of the protocols we were taught in our trainings. Let's shout them from the top. Let's say, yes, yes, I'm going to do this otherwise. I'm going to do a kind of space making that Feluke's book shows us that we have to do. A space making that holds on to what she calls spiralism, working from Frank Etienne. A spiralism that makes rooms a room and offers other ways of contending with difference outside the categorical. How then do we inhabit our training spaces or the orthodoxies in which we were made as therapists that are in the image of whiteness and say, I will acknowledge that happened, I recognize it, and I will surrender it, I will give it up and move into another space, another way of knowing and being and thinking and practicing that is in the image of Black feminisms and the portals of opportunity it opens to us. How do we do that? The gift of the Unruly Therapeutics offers us this. It is a gift, but boy, is it a challenge too. Can we do it? Can we find a way to do it? It's hard. It's hard. And yet, if we follow through every chapter in the book, as you read through it, will unsettle, will put you in face of things that you know, or if you feel that you cannot occupy a space called Black Woman Life, will put you in a conversation with that you have deemed other, categorically not me, categorically other to me. And each chapter will offer you the opportunity to say, come with me, walk, you can, let's do this together. Let's find a way together in our multiplicity to occupy that space of opacity that Feluke writes of in the following way, a very important thing. For those of us who experience these knowledge worlds within which we seek to practice therapeutics as meager, confining, and bereft, glissance of opacity offers room to breathe. Opacity as a way of being with difference other than by creating categorical difference. Opacity as a countering of practices of othering, which are then followed by trying to understand otherness by making it transparent. To respect opacity means not dissecting, examining, or putting difference under a microscope, perhaps hoping to develop competency, but instead embracing a multi-relational world of which we ourselves are a part. In a multi-relational world in which miracles are not confined to a particular people or realm, judged as believable or not, but a dynamic part of the multiplicity of life. Questions of opacity are important for therapeutic practice because they ask that we attend to our meetings with what is unseen, to how we meet what we may experience as impenetrable, unintelligible, confusing, and outside of our own experience. An unruly therapeutic does not need us to make sense of other being for that being to make or have sense. Unruly does not need to believe in miracles. The unruly proposition is to be with it all. So there's that gift again. There's the challenge and there's the opportunity to move into opacity, to work with our clients, patients, analysans, whatever we call them, the people with whom we're in relation and who bring into our rooms both the horrors of categorical difference and its violences and the other ways of being, of living, if we can be open to seeing them and working together with them. Feluke shows us some of the ways in which we might do this. So this is the gift at one level as well. At the same time, I think what Feluke's book does is show us in the very mode of writing which we've heard now as she's read to us, the very mode of writing itself, or the mode of citational practice that's completely inscribed in the book, is a mode of walking with, of being alongside and in relationship with, and allowing your own associations to develop in communing, in spiritual connection with that has been mobilized for us in the text, in the artistic work, in the voices of the people we're in the room with. That mode of citational practice that isn't a kind of triumphant knowing over above, I know more than you, I will use this to make you healthy, to bring you to wholeness, which means to bring you to a kind of form of subjectivity that is in the image of whiteness, but rather to say, we will walk together and find a way to discover what it might mean to be whole together in the moment. And from there, move and come back, move and come back, move and come back as we do our journeys and gather up even more ways of doing Black feminist living practices in the context of our work. So what I'm saying, Feluke, my dear Feluke, is that it seems to me you've shown us in the work, because you do say this book is for everybody. You don't have to be Black or woman or, you know, for this book to be about. It is for everyone. And you show us that it is possible to occupy the space. No, occupy spaces in conversation with, in real respectful conversation with, in living with, in finding living room for that which is Black feminism, as embodied and as pronounced as a mode of ethical relation, and to do that, whatever categorical positions you have been placed in and that have formed your consciousness and your sense of self and your identity and your subjectivity, but always with the possibility of mobilizing that thing that is aligned to Black feminism, it seems to me, called the unconscious, because the unconscious is unruly and inhabits us in different ways. I think that the way that you show us in the work, in its form, that this is how to be in relation, in ongoing relation, without final end. Here we've arrived at the end. Now we really all know this is it. You show us that this is an ongoing practice of living that precedes us, that comes through us, and extends beyond us. And that our moments of therapeutic encounter are simply points in the ocean of a gathering, a coming together, a rising up, and a gap that opens on the wave as you start to breathe, to catch that gap of air as you swim through and come back into the waters. This is what you show us. This is what you gift us. This is what you challenge us, the us of a community of practice called therapists. It is extraordinary. There is no way to thank you for it, really, other than to take the book, to work with it, to carry it and walk with it and use it, not simply in mimicry, but in your own idiom, as a practice of undoing the violences in the forms of therapeutic life that we've been all subject to. So that's it. Thank you.
Now it's my turn to say, gosh. Wow.
I have to say it was a bit more of a stream of consciousness. My notes are somewhat different apart from the beginning, but it's just what evolved from from being here, being in this living room here with you now.
Thank you. Thank you for the richness of the response. I mean, I guess writing is for me or a call, and it's going to take me a while to process the response, the layers in that response. Fortunately, this is recorded and I get to hear it again. But yeah, thank you.
I'm sort of joining you all through video now, but I've been listening and feeling a similar resonance with that idea of a magnificence to this, to what you both have said, and to feeling very moved by it, although I also am it feels a bit unprocessed. And if I try to locate some of the words, I think what comes to life for me is an invitation, and what Gail said, a challenge, a pull even to get really curious about the unruly as a mode of living with trouble, as a way of making space for also relationality, and to think to myself, how could I tune in? How could I be unruly out loud, particularly when I'm in where others find themselves to be in constraining spaces or where borders are crossing them. I think that struck me too, and bodies that tend to be silenced. How does one live or tune into unruliness? But I also want to extend this invitation now to the attendees and to everyone here to open it up for this discussion, to make space for the silence or what's not yet processed or what you wish to share in the Q&A chat. So please, we invite you to submit anything that maybe is coming to mind or felt, comments, thoughts, reactions, and inquiries. Feluke and Gail, you may be able to see the Q&A and some comments already within it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Robert Downs, for another one of my colleagues who has kind of interacted with the book. I realized that not everybody will have been able to interact with the book, and I'm reflecting on I guess what you've both said, Gail and Zenobia, about processing, about the challenge of it and the need for space and time and maybe silence in this moment to be with that. Maybe it's not easy. I don't know, I'm curious. Maybe it's not easy to kind of respond to like that, to formulate questions around or to have ideas about. But yeah, Robert's interacted with it over a period of time. So I really appreciate your recognition of the unruly poetics and the thickening potential.
There is a question from Evelyn King here.
Mm-hmm.
I am so grateful to be here and sharing living space with such amazing thinkers. I did have a question. As we talk more about play, is it about getting the people we work with to understand the importance of play, or the practice systems we're working in? So, somebody
wondered if you wanted to say something about play, Gail. I was talking about play partly because I opened with this quote from Gail about play and Black feminism as an object available for play.
I suppose I would. I think, thank you, Evelyn, for that question, and it's provocative. You know, I mean, it incites thought. That's what I mean by provocative. My immediate response for me, I think it's not so much about getting the people we work with to understand, because that's a mode of practice that is against the walking with, in a sense. But it's more, how can we, in our practice, create a space, a living room in which we play, and play becomes the doing, if you like, you know. And I mean, Feluke quoted my thing about play, which is from Winnicott, really, you know, about how it's both, you know, potential to come into personhood, you know, to find yourself, but also full of danger and terror. So I think in that sense, the institutions and systems that we work with, you know, are certainly full of danger and terror, but can we find a way in multivocality, in engaging with each other in multiple ways, in ways that hold open difference, not as certain, for example, and hierarchically ordered, all of those things, in a way that allows us to engage in otherwise ways that hold open the potential for what might come, without knowing, without being certain we know what is going on. And in some senses, isn't that what therapeutic work is? We so often don't know what's going on. We have to just stay with it. We don't know what's going on. And I think what Feluke's book shows us is we can know that as therapists. You know, we can say we don't always know what's going on in the room. So what you do is you go to, is this kind of this conceptual process, we understand it conceptually, we have concepts. Is this what's going on here? I think Feluke is saying, we don't know. Stay with the don't know and see what emerges. Like when you read the book, people, you'll see that, I think it's quite early on, there's a whole description Feluke has of working with somebody in the room, and Feluke is always wondering why she smells ginger. Drinking ginger tea today, so why she smells ginger. And one day she takes the risk of raising it, speaking to it directly, and it opens a whole line of meaningful relation, not just thought, but meaningful relation that draws on heritage and ancestors, goes forward. So that's the space of play, if you like. Take the risk. Let me see what's here. See if I can put this element together with that one, and what happens, and speak to it. So I think it's in that sense that we, just to say, Evelyn, what we're trying to do then, I think, is play is about saying, how do we occupy the spaces in ways that are potentially rich, but are always dangerous, that are premised on a kind of not knowing, but an intuitive feeling of what's needed in the moment, and see where we go from there.
Yeah, and I'd add, you see, that intuitive moment, somebody's, it's Shema Vaughan, is asking, are we talking about decolonizing therapy? Thank you, Shemia. Being able to go with that intuitive moment actually requires an unraveling from something. I don't know if we're talking about decolonizing therapy, but I do know that our inner colonizers and our colonized selves clamp down on that moment, because it's a risk. It's a risk of being seen as the, well, in all the categories you've already been put in. The ones who don't know, the ones who are not sophisticated, the ones who don't understand. And I guess because I'm working a lot in education, I see how difficult it is to play in psychotherapeutic training spaces. It's a really hard place to play. So I think that if we're decolonizing, I mean, play, I suppose, would be an element for me in that process. And I don't know if we become decolonized, but there is something about the freedom to follow the feeling you have, the hunch you have, the intuition, the, you know, the other information that you have been taught and encouraged to disregard. You know, what Toni Morrison calls that discredited knowledge, the one that's called mumbo jumbo and superstition, and because it is, you know, because it belongs to people who've been discredited. So I think it takes quite a lot of courage to play, because it can be risky. The terrain of monsters. You can easily find yourself being monstrous, made monstrous. And I know I'm probably, you know, by now I think, well, the people who want to work with me want to work with me. So maybe it's less of a risk now. I'm not starting out in my practice, you know, I can probably survive anyway. And yet still I can feel shy, or, you know, I can feel the risk of it. I can feel the trouble, because I can feel what is threatened. This is a big industry. It's a big community. There's a lot at stake. But of course, I'm interested in what's at stake for our lives, primarily.
But I guess in a way, I would say for Luke that the conception of personhood that travels through the book is a decolonized one, because it is outside of the notion of what it means to be human. What it means to be human as as that's been delivered to us in all of the disciplines that call themselves knowledge. You know, whether they call themselves radical ones, you know, or liberal ones, or the truth, or, you know, the facts, you know, they all embrace and circulate, pivot around a colonial conception of not just the hierarchies of humankind, but what it means to be a human. And in the book, you're saying all the ways in which Black women are rubbished, erased from, you know, in all the ways from that. But we're here, look, we're here. But the we that's here is not in those images at all. So in that sense, you know, you can kind of call it a decolonized figure without necessarily going into long conversations about what constitutes the decolonial.
Yeah, and I suppose I'd add to it, the decolonized figure, I never think of it as singular. I think
it's not exactly.
One of I noticed Lara's put in there about speaking. Part of what I love about your work, as you know, is its constantly emerging radical potentials, the unruly that is committed to life worlds and not linked up with death alone, despite oppression, which is what you're talking about again. And you speak to how this unruly constitutively also resists liberal humanist co-optation. And I don't know if I can speak to it, actually. I mean, but I think one of the things that it puts in my mind is how I resist that co-optation is partly by not being one, by actually being with others and ensuring that, you know, I talk about it as the kind of I and I self, if you like. There's a little me who's very concerned with what I look like and what will happen to me, and who might be afraid actually to take the risk to play and to challenge and to resist kind of co-optation, or might even be attracted to that somewhere. But there's a bigger me, an I and I me that is not just me, that is me in relation with others, that refuses that it just doesn't make sense to it. It's out, it's not legible. Do you know what I mean by it's not, it doesn't make any sense. So that helps me. I don't think I couldn't have done it by myself.
Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, a part of what I said, I guess, is gather ourselves. So feel where the borders are crossing us, the disciplines and borders, but also gather ourselves, our collective body, because yeah, we can't do this alone. So I don't know if that probably doesn't really answer that question, Lara, but it's a response. Is there anything else in there that?
Just to say, there's something I hear you both mentioning about being in the interstices or in the in-between, and not just in a boundaried sort of I that not only resists, but I think invites a subversive mode of being to a colonial logic, if we want to think about that question of decolonizing. I think there may be another prompt from anonymous attendee. These ideas are beautiful, thank you. I wonder, though, they seem diametrically opposed to how most therapy is conducted. How does one find and or develop such a communal, interactive relationship with clinicians or with a clinician?
I wonder if this is also makes me think about those interstices, if you like, the crevices of power Catherine McKittrick talks about, in which we find ourselves. I guess they do seem diametrically opposed to maybe how we think therapy is conducted. But in a way, part of the motivation and the material for writing the book came because after years and years of working with students and people seeking therapy and therapists, I realized it's diametrically opposed to how most therapy is seen to be conducted, but not necessarily to how therapy is conducted. That, yes, how it's offered, how it might be taught, how if you are seeking accreditation or wanting to pass a course, you might present it, how it's written in a case study. But often it is very different, actually. There are things happening that are more relational and are more instinctual. And I think sometimes there's a tendency to theorize that instinctual, to kind of try to find theory that supports this intervention. I'm making this intervention because this person said, because the unconscious, because projection, because, well, but I don't know what you think, Gail, but sometimes I'm not sure if that's just not a way of trying to legitimize what you feel to do, what makes sense to you in that moment. And no moment is ever the same, is it? So in a way, trying to apply theory to this kind of moving, living, breathing relationship, well, it can be well, it's layered. I don't think it's simple. I don't think it's straightforward. So yeah, Gail kind of challenged me then. You talked about how important, not me, challenged us all, how important it is to not hide. I think you said something like, to kind of to put it out there. And maybe this question speaks to that, really. This is the problem. If we don't put it out there, then it looks as though something, something, what is it? Something that I'm saying, something that's diametrically opposed to how therapy happens. But I'm not sure that I am.
But it just made me think as well, that question says, anonymous attendee, that maybe this space, I mean, I know it's a Zoom space and we're in a webinar, but I don't know how people can, maybe this is a space of develop, that has the potential, it could drop a seed to develop different kinds of relationships among clinicians. And especially if part of what it is actually talking very openly to each other about what we do in the room, what we would like to do but feel we can't, as well, and get, and then we can mobilize the voices of other clinicians, in the room and say, oh, but they're on my shoulders saying, go, Gail, go, it's fine, it's okay. You can test this, see what happens, try it. It's really alive for you in this heat at this moment of encounter in the room. Go with it, trust it. So maybe it's partly having those conversations and taking opportunities of building communal conversation, at least, from moments.
Yeah, it's part of the limitation of this form, I guess, of advice. Isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Actually, but I don't know if people share if the participants get shared. I don't know whether it's possible, just say, were you at that thing? How would you do this? I don't know. This is movement, Gail, talking, sorry, how do we build the networks?
Yeah, but I think it's an important point, because I think at this point, that was exactly where I would go, would start thinking about, okay, the specifics. Yeah, how do you develop your interactive relationship in the room, given all of this? How are you doing that? What support do we need? Who else is doing it? How is it happening? But there's a limit to I love to be here. I love the opportunity to speak, but I guess we're speaking to the limit of, and now we would like to speak to everybody. Now we want to get into a conversation about, and okay, what's possible and how can we make space together? That, yeah. That's interesting. There's an anonymous attendees. Some friends and I take field trips to see you both present, and we have a text chat going at the same time. A living room of sorts. Yes, fabulous. That actually warms my heart. That brings me joy. So yeah, there's something going on. I don't even know where it's going on, but something is going on. Can you see that, Gail, right at the bottom? Yeah.
I just saw it now, yeah.
So making living rooms.
I suppose I want to say, oh, well, if that's okay, come and say hi, because then that expands my living room too, like having you people in it and thinking with your thoughts too,
Yeah.
Perhaps in a similar vein, I see Shemya saying this would be a much more useful conversation during supervision and case consultation with a group like this. I hope someone creates this kind of community someday.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I want to see that. Can I see it? Oh, yeah. Wow, that lands with me. I so recognize that from those moments. Because I have to say that in my training, and I will always say, because I always say this, in terms of my educational experience, my training was the best educational experience I'd had, in the sense of I felt I actually grew. But I also had to hide. I kept quiet. Well, I was less successful at keeping it quiet than I thought I had done, because afterwards people say, oh yeah, but we know that you did all this, stuff. But I kept my, if you like, my sociological self quiet, because I didn't want to be shut down. And therefore, if I brought it into the room, the case consultation or supervision, less in supervision, but in case consultation, because I didn't want to be shut down and therefore have my learning from that space shut down as well. So I found a way to say, I know this stuff, I'm going to keep it right here, and I'm going to take what I'm learning from here in this room with you guys there, and learning to do the work through a particular kind, and then I with my people outside are going to bring them together, going to meld them. So I hid. So partly that was my point about if we hide what we do in the room, is partly a self-criticism too, and stuff. But I totally, I'm just saying that, Shamia, because it really landed with me, that point about how important such conversations as this in those locations. And our challenge is how to make that happen.
It leads me to think about how play can be constrained, especially in training, if a stake there is losing your learning space altogether. That's part of the risk. I think Linda maybe builds upon this in response. Thank you for this space and your mind-opening thoughts. What you both are talking about makes me think of what I lost or relinquished of myself in the process of training for this work, and how that seems to be the point of training. It seems that we have to overcome aspects of our training. Can we imagine a different form of training for this work so we don't have to then undo it?
Yeah, well, I hope so. We try to imagine, and I co-wrote a chapter with a colleague of mine, Robert Downs, who I think is in this this room somewhere, in which we did imagine a training that had space for all of this, and while that particular imagining hasn't kind of formed in a concrete way, as far as I know, I do know that that chapter has been taken into many different spaces, and the way that people respond, that it starts to generate in them kind of questions about, well, what do we imagine? What does make sense? What do we need? How are we not relinquishing? How can we train in ways that where, instead of relinquishing ourselves because they are not, they don't fit, or they're not allowed safely in the space, how can we think about those parts that we're called to relinquish, and learn from them and think about them? So yeah, imagine, I guess, in short, yes, let's keep imagining. Let's, in all the ways that we can. Writing is one of my tools of imagining, but there are many, there are many ways that we do this. And again, imagining together. So, hence how wonderful it's been to have Gail here with me, because the call and response, what is generated in that way, is more than I could know. That is the unknown. Thank you. There we are. That chapter is now in the Q&A, the link to that chapter, if anybody wants to read that. Yeah. And thank you to Carnella, Gordon Brown, and Iman, who are both kind of expressing gratitude and appreciations, which I'm soaking them all up. They are fuel for the otherwise and elsewhere and ongoing. Yeah.
I'll just say, yes, agree with Fuluke there. Thank you for expressing it, Fuluke.
I have my eye on the time, and I know it's almost time to end for this evening. Last thoughts from anyone here? I certainly feel as though even if I'm left with something unprocessed or unformulated, that a process was generated together, an imagining of sorts that I felt a part of this evening. I'm just immensely grateful for that, and to you both for leading us, inviting us into that, and for everyone to join in that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zenobia. And in a way, that's the biggest compliment. I think that it's unknown, isn't it? It's still kind of up in the air. It's still landing, or hopefully, yeah, it's offering something in an ongoing way. Thank you for your willingness to be with the unprocessed and share it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you to everyone for joining this evening. And I think what's unsettled is generative. That's sort of what I'm sitting. That's what I'm sitting with. Thank you for the gift, as Gail said, to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.